Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. Faculty, students, friends, family, it is really a pleasure and an honor to have you here tonight. I want to thank Professor Johannes Knoops for his energy and dedication for bringing us back these Larry Israel lecture talks. I want to also thank the administrative group, Shaniqua, Pat, Adrian, everyone who has in one way or another contributed to make this evening happen. I want to first tell you a little bit about the interior design program. You all know that we have an AAS and a BFA program. We are a City of New York Community College. That is our label. Our program is a bachelor's program and has been so for the past 50 years. Next year, we will be turning 60 years old. What do you say about that? I think it's pretty impressive that we are turning 60 years old because there are so many people that have worked so very hard to get us here. One of those people was Lawrence Israel, and you'll see Larry with his students. And Larry is the one that had a dream of bringing people from all winds of life, the way that he will say it, to teach us about design, to inspire us about design. So Johannes and his committee have chosen the winner for tonight, and he will introduce the winner. But you know that you are in an interior design program that has been just labeled top in the nation. Did you all see that? FIT did a nice piece on that as well. I think that goes to the strength of the program, to the curriculum, to past chairs that have been here. And tonight, Andy Cipher, the past chair of the program, is also here. So we have past chairs, professors. Thank you to all the professors that brought the students here and to all the professors that wanted to bring the students here and could not be here. But thank you all for coming. It is an extremely special evening for us. Larry, in return, having enjoyed the rich dialogue between students and faculty, he offered us this gift. His vision was to stimulate our minds into design thinking and thinking outside of our boxes to experience design. He was known affectionately as Larry. He was an icon in the retail design community. Larry was one of the original founding members of the Institute of Store Planning in 1961. Following an outstanding career in retail design, he was introduced into the Retail Design Institute Hall of Fame. That was in 2001. After graduating magna cum laude from the New York University School of Architecture, he joined the New York-based office of Copeland and Nova Architects as a designer and quickly rose to partner. As the firm's name changed to Copeland, Nova, and Israel, CNI, the firm was widely recognized and awarded for its work for Macy's. We have the director of the Macy's office here. Thank you for joining us. Other divisions of the Federated Department Stores, Saks Fifth Avenue, and Harrods of London in 1985. CNI merged with New York-based Walker Group, creating the Walker Group CNI, where he served as chairman until his retirement in 1990. After his retirement, Larry continued to play an active role in the design community, authoring a book on retail design and teaching interior design at the Fashion Institute of Technology. It is a great pleasure of mine to invite Johannes Knoops, chair of the committee, to come over to join us.
Thank you, Carmita. Thank you for welcoming everybody. Let me just give you the brief history of our honorees. Larry actually chose the first one, and our first honoree was Charles Guathame, the famous architect of one of the Whites, and followed by John Saladino, an influential tastemaker. We have Margot Grant Welsh, a woman of corporate level with Gensler, and Claudia, who can go by her first name like Cher, and an earth mother of interior design. We have Billy Sin, a real innovator in terms of materials and obsession of details. We have the influential tastemaker Vicente Wolf, and then in 2004, Bromley Caldari of Studio 54 fame. The culinary giant Adam Tahani, who elevated dining to a level of performance. The glamorous Jamie Drake and his delicious colors. The architect Lindy Roy and her research-driven work. The concept-driven, yet fashionable but not forgettable Avro Co. The legendary Gaetano Pesce, a lion in the innovation of furniture and plastics. In 2010, we had the witty, material-driven firm of LTL Architects. Oh, and then we had David Rockwell, the master of spectacle in 2011. In 2012, the thought-provoking designers of the unexpected, Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro. Oh, 2013, it was fairly early in their career in retrospect, and they were so nervous. They finished their presentation in 20 minutes. They ran out of slides, and well, you should have been here. Okay, so we have Ada and Giuseppe of Low-Tech and their upscaled containers. The discriminating and highly exacting Tony Chi, who happens to be an FIT alumni, famous for his global hospitality. And then in 2016, Shop, where many of our students have interned. And then we had the mod and motivated Kareem Rashid, followed by Annabelle Seldorf, who was a classmate of mine at Pratt, and Eric Daniels. And our last presentation was actually 2019, Alexandra Champlamond, a woman of global luxury. And then the pandemic hit, and we all know what happened. And so tonight we celebrate the work of Joel Sanders. Joel Sanders is a deeply thoughtful intellect and designer. He's principal of JSA, Joel Sanders Architects, and Mixed Design, MIX, an LGBTBE certified architecture studio and inclusive design consultancy that works with institutional clients to consider the needs of a broad segment of the population that the discipline of architecture has traditionally overlooked, including our own. In addition, Joel has also been a professor at Parsons and a professor at Yale, and is still teaching at Yale, where he's working now in public health and trying to, can I say that it's a combination of health concerns and design? And we'll learn more about his initiatives tonight, and he has several that he'd like to share with us. In our complex world, Joel Sanders' thought-provoking work has achieved global notoriety. From his pioneering House for a Bachelor, included in MoMA's exhibition, The Unprivate House, curated by Terence Riley, whose essay you might have read in the syllabus. We used to include that intro essay, which was about new typologies in interiors. And now, more recently, his exhibition is Your Restroom is a Battleground, exhibited at the 2022 Venice Biennale, which I was able to attend. His provocations have upended preconceptions of gender and space. Most notably, he was honored with an AIA award for his project Stalled, transforming public restrooms, a project responding to the national controversies surrounding transgender access to public spaces. Back in 1996, a publication I remember fondly, he edited Stud, Architectures of Masculinity, dealing with subjects that are only now being seriously discussed by our profession. Mr. Sanders' relationship with FIT started in 2003 with his competition entry for our new academic center, which is currently finishing construction. Joel was one of only 3 finalists. And his particular scheme was about weaving and unity and interactive spaces for the FIT community. Sadly, that wasn't chosen, but Joel was able to, maintains his relationship with FIT and has designed exhibits for the museum. The famous show, A Queer History of Fashion from the Closet to the Catwalk. It is a great honor for me to call to the stage Joel Sanders. We congratulate you, Joel, but I'd like to call a student, on behalf of the student body, we have an award. I'd like to ask Alex, one of our thesis students, to the stage.
Maybe turn it the other way.
Oh, there we go. This is the money shot, right?
So on behalf of the student body, I am presenting the LIF award to Joel Sanders.
Oh, boy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We still believe in hand drawing,
Yeah.
so at this point, I'd like to turn the stage over to Joel.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Joel.
Right, would you hold this? so you can
Yes,
keep it
thank
going?
you.
You can't keep it, yeah. So, okay, yeah. Should we turn down the lights a bit? Yeah. Well, first, thank you very much to Professor, I hope I'm pronouncing Knoops. Yes, sort of? Okay, and your chair, Carmita Sanchez-Fang, for the generous introduction. And I also want to thank the most trusted member of my studio, Marco Lee, who's in the audience and is responsible for collaborating on a lot of the work I'm going to be showing tonight. And most of all, thanks so much for awarding me this Lawrence Israel Prize. It's overwhelming to see the sort of roster of sort of amazing designers who have preceded me. And, it goes without saying that receiving a design award is wonderful, right? It's a sign of recognition, affirmation from peers. But this prize is especially meaningful, right? It's given to, I'm quoting, an individual whose ideas and works enrich FIT Interior Design Students' course of study. And I've been teaching my whole career, which has been more than 35 years, and this is especially meaningful because it indicates that the work of my studio, our work, Marco's work, has an impact on you and in particular students who will graduate from a great school like FIT and apply lessons learned in school in quote-unquote the real world. So thank you very much. Okay. So should we lower the lights at all, or we did that already? Yeah? Whatever? I guess you can see. Okay, so, and I'm going to try to keep my remarks to about 45 minutes. I want people in the audience to let me know if if we're going on too long. And here we start. So, so in my teaching and practice over the course of my career, I've been thinking about the relationship between architecture, human embodiment, and minority communities that the design disciplines, but I'm going to focus my remarks on the relationship between architecture and interiors. I was trained as an architect, but most of the work of my studio has really focused on interior architecture, okay? And I think that these relationships have been overlooked. And this inquiry about architecture, human embodiment, and minority communities began in 1996 when I edited a book. It's called Stud, Architectures of Masculinity, that looked at the role ordinary environments, places like homes, offices, parks, and bathrooms, which I'll be talking a lot about tonight, play in the construction of human and in particular gender identity, and looking at this issue through a queer lens. And so one theme I want to talk about today that typical of my work, this book was the product of the convergence of personal, professional, and political circumstances. My coming out as a gay man, this is back in 1996, while an assistant professor at Princeton School of Architecture, and all against the backdrop, the turmoil of the AIDS crisis back in the 1990s. Let's see. Why isn't this going forward? I'm sorry. Let's see. No, I'm sorry. It should be my computer. It should be working. Oh, there you go. Okay, sorry. So STUD was based on the notion of gender, as I said, as performance, a concept that was borrowed from queer theorist Judith Butler, who argued that human identity in general and gender identity in particular are not inborn biological traits, but rather culturally constructed, learned modes of behavior. And Butler, as well as a little bit later, a trans theorist, Jack Halberstam, referred to drag queens and drag kings as examples of gender performance, describing how their exaggerated sort of gestures, their makeup, their wigs, their costumes expose how gender is not innate but performed. And Butler's brilliant analysis of the way the drag performer relied on sort of costume to construct identity or fashion led me to think beyond the body and to think about the setting and to think about the affinities between what I call clothing and cladding. And by this, I mean the ephemeral elements like wallpaper, paint, fabrics, curtains, upholstery, and furniture that interior designers use to sort of dress the interior shell, which at least when I was young, was typically designed by architects. And the point is that both the hard surfaces and the soft surfaces are applied materials with cultural connotations that we use to communicate our identities to the outside world. And so I was intrigued by how, for example, queer spaces like gay leather bars, particularly those I was familiar with back in the day, made explicit this link between fashion, architecture, and gender. So, for example, the Leatherman's attire and the club interior are both, again, clad or dressed in materials that allude to places associated with American hypermasculinity. They could be construction sites, biker bars, and prisons. So in this case, the Leatherman's attire, his handlebar mustache, hairy chest, black leather jacket and hat, and metal harness are sort of visually compatible. They harmonize with the club's exposed brick walls, wood scaffolding, metal grills, and saw horses. And so shortly after completing STUD, I launched my fledgling architectural studio and JSA, and we received a series of projects like this one, the Lee Loft. We thought of them as sort of queer bachelor pads, and they afforded the opportunity for me and my staff to apply, let's say, a queer design sensibility to residential design, which is what a lot of my early projects were. So we tried to elide or blur traditional distinctions between architecture, interiors, and fashion. In this case, we dressed the interior. This is the bedroom of the Lee Loft. We dressed it in finishes and fabrics that were inspired by three hypermale environments: sex clubs, boardrooms, and men's clubs. And so, for example, the leather floor tiles sort of blend with the leather platform bed that complements the dark mahogany paneling, again, inspired by these different interiors. And again, don't have more slides, but all of the furniture was upholstered in a palette of menswear fabrics, suede, leather, gray flannel. And as Johannes mentioned, in 2003, we were very excited to have the opportunity to be invited to design a new classroom building here at FIT. And it was an opportunity for us to then think about this relationship between fashion and architecture. The facade is wrapped in alternating convex and concave glass panels to evoke a woven textile. And the atrium featured a golden thread made of, again, soft materials like carpeting and upholstery that was meant to define a continuous circulation path along its length, activated by student lounges that weave together the buildings of 5 classroom levels. And we won second prize. Shop Architects, whose work I admire, and they're friends of mine, won the competition. However, this theme still, actually, I was thinking about this, looking at Marco again, we're designing a few projects that actually incorporate a similar idea later. However, about 10 years later, I received what you could call a consolation prize for not winning, but I don't think that's true. But anyway, we were really honored to be invited by Valerie Steele, renowned fashion historian, curator, and director of the museum at FIT, to design the exhibition, A Queer History of Fashion from the Closet to the Catwalk. And this exhibit included about 100 ensembles. It traced how gay subcultural trends became mainstream when they were adapted or appropriated by high fashion designers. For example, Yves Saint Laurent, who was inspired by Parisian lesbians of the 1920s, or Gianni Versace, who again appropriated fashion cues from 1970s gay men. And so now I want to fast forward from the 90s to about 2015, and to basically say that this investigation of queer space that informed my early work, again, was a response to current events at that time, the AIDS epidemic. And now, 25 years later, another national debate, transgender access to public restrooms, rekindled my interest, but really my office's interest in queer space in 2016. However, this time, rather than looking at it through a gay male perspective, as I did earlier, my perspective, I wanted to expand my horizons and collaborate with someone who could help us think about it through a transgender lens. So, a little bit of background. In 2016, President Obama passed a federal law mandating that schools allow students to use the men's or women's bathroom that aligned with their gender identity. And in response, there was a conservative backlash. Many of you know about this. North Carolina, followed by 12 Republican states, issued bills that mandated sex-segregated restrooms be used, again, and this is important. There was a men's room and a women's room. The choice was that you could use it either based on one's gender expression, which is what trans people wanted, or based on the identity identified on your birth certificate. And as many of you know, this is an ongoing, unresolved issue that still is polarizing Americans today, and I think is one of the issues that is centering around the new presidential elections and debates. So, back then, I reached out to Susan Stryker, a leading transgender historian, theorist, and activist, who I had met at a conference years before. What began as a phone conversation turned into an academic essay, which we co-authored in the South Atlantic Quarterly. But it grew into STALD, an ongoing design research initiative dedicated to coming up with guidelines and prototypes for inclusive public restrooms. And what was interesting, at least for me, was that on these phone conversations, Susan quickly said, Joel, you called me, to solve this immediate problem about trans access. But what I think we need to do, a trans woman said this to me, we need to leverage what was then a new trend, trans visibility, published in the mainstream media. Magazines like Vanity Fair and Time featured Olympic gold medal winner Caitlyn Jenner or RuPaul on its covers, and there was a hit TV show, Transparent, about a California family whose father comes out as a trans woman. And so Susan said, Joel, we need to expand our scope and consider not only people like me, trans folk, but the needs of other marginalized groups that have been, and this I think is really important as a takeaway, that have been historically ignored by designers like us. So a little bit of background. Since antiquity, Western architects and designers have created buildings by studying the characteristics of two kinds of bodies, either an ideal classical body represented by Leonardo's Vitruvian Man, or a so-called, and we're fast-forwarding, this is the 19th century, for the first time what was called a standard, a typical, a normal body, represented here by Henry Dreyfuss's anthropometric diagrams and charts that are still reproduced in design manuals like graphic standards that we use today. And my point is that both this classical ideal body and the anthropometric normal body are assumed to be white, able-bodied, cisgender, heterosexual, and male, okay? And that this anthropomorphic data has been the basis of design standards encoded in the architectural textbooks, the guidelines and codes that are still in use today. And during the 20th century, Americans and Europeans used this so-called objective data to validate all kinds of discriminatory policies, including eugenics, a racist pseudoscience that categorized humans into two hierarchical classes. There were superior, able-bodied whites, as opposed to people who were different, people marked because of their race, their gender, or their ethnicity. And at different moments in history, unfortunately, including in our own right now, these arguments, this data, has been used to justify discriminatory policies determining who has access to and who is excluded from public space. And this has included women, people of color, immigrants, and the disabled, based on the assumption that repeats through history that these populations possess either innate physical, mental, or moral defects that rendered them unfit to enter the public realm. And just two examples are Jim Crow laws that segregated whites from blacks in trains, water fountains, bathrooms in the South until the 1960s, excuse me. And more recently, Trump's border wall erected to so-called protect American citizens from the influx of dangerous Mexican immigrants. And we all know that this issue of immigration is a huge issue that we're facing again today. So mixed design, or what I say, so JSA became JSA Mixed Design, okay? We are an inclusive design studio dedicated to combating our discipline's complicity in reinforcing racism, heteronormativity, and ableism. We work with progressive clients when we're lucky enough to develop guidelines and prototypes for making everyday building types safe and accessible for a variety of people with different identities and different kinds of bodies. And our work is based on a series of design principles which build upon, but differentiate themselves from the important foundation laid by the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, passed in 1990, okay? So first, intersectional or intersectionality. Rather than narrowly focus on people with physical or sensory disabilities alone, which is what most codes do, we consider the overlapping needs of a broader spectrum of the population. We study overlapping factors, including disability, people with mobility, sensory, and neurodiversity challenges, neurodiversity people with autism. We think about gender, cisgender men and women, but also non-binary folk, trans folk. And we consider culture, the spatial requirements associated with race and religion. And we offer an alternative to the separate but equal model characteristic of most accessibility standards. A recent example, just last week, I was lucky enough to go to the Perlman Center, a new theater that opened near Ground Zero. Here's the entry, okay? It requires elderly people like me, or people in wheelchairs who have a problem climbing this extremely steep stairs that's the primary way of getting to the main entrance. And it forces those populations to separate from their companions and take a separate route via, as you can see here, a kind of a tube that leads to an elevator. And so rather than offer separate accommodations that stigmatize people with quote-unquote special needs, our objective is to create spaces that allow the maximum number of people with different embodied identities, and I'm talking about individuals, friends, families, and caregivers, to share the same public space, while also at the same time providing options for people who can't share. Are you holding something up? Oh, I thought it was the time. I'm sorry. Okay. But the idea is, again, we want the maximum number of people to share and not have to separate from one another, have the same experience entering buildings or using buildings, but also recognizing that there's certain populations, for example, Muslim women or Orthodox Jews, that can't share, that require privacy in bathrooms, which I'll talk about. So now I'm going to circle back to this earlier discussion about mixed design's first initiative, Stalled. But here to show you Stalled as a case study of how at Mixed Design we're attempting to put these principles that I've discussed, inclusive design principles, into practice. Okay, so first, we took a different approach from the lawyers, journalists, politicians, and activists who we were reading about, who were addressing this issue. This is 10 years ago. All of them accepted that there should be, that the norm of the sex-segregated restroom is inevitable. There's a men's room and a women's room. The question was, which one could you go to? We thought, why can't we think about this from a design standard and think about it through design innovation? And also, rather than narrowly frame bathroom design, people think of bathrooms as the quintessentially the most functional design problem. The only thing that matters is ergonomics and plumbing, okay? And so instead, we assembled an interdisciplinary team of experts who still work with us, pictured here, that represent trans theory, history, law, accessibility, and public health, to step back, take a broader view, and look at this problem, a contemporary problem in a cultural and historical and political context. And so the other thing I want to point out is our methodology always is a two-step process, okay? Before putting pen to paper or mouse to computer screen, we begin with cross-disciplinary research. And so in this case, our team looked at public restrooms through the lens of American political, architectural, and legal history to understand how we came to the crossroads where we're at today. Very briefly, we immediately learned that bathroom controversies are not new. At different moments in American history, the public restroom has been a kind of crucible, a cauldron that registers social anxieties triggered by the threat of marginalized groups entering into mainstream society. Historical milestones have included the first ladies' rooms, they were called, to accommodate women entering the workplace in the late 1890s. Then next, the fight to abolish the colored bathroom during the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. Something I was witness, the fear of contamination posed by gay men sharing public bathrooms with ostensibly straight men during the AIDS crisis in the 1980s and 90s. And there was a 30-year struggle to make public spaces, including bathrooms, accessible by the disability rights movement that finally won passage in 1990. And in each case, I think what's important is that the restroom, by virtue of being an actual space that we use every day, multiple times a day, transformed this kind of abstract fear into a tangible fear, that so-called normal, fine, upstanding citizens would be forced to physically encounter people who are different and potentially dangerous and contaminating. The other thing we also did was we looked into design history to trace the evolution of restrooms from antiquity to today. What we found refutes one of the central arguments used by opponents of all gender restrooms. This idea that sex-segregated restrooms are a universal given. Why? And here I quote, this was a part of a Supreme Court case. Because they respond to the universal need for privacy between the two sexes. Right, already based on the assumption that there are, in fact, two sexes, okay? And we learned that from antiquity until the 18th century in the West, bathing and eliminating was a communal activity. For example, in London during the Middle Ages, people of all ages and sexes excreted together, I'm going to say, took shits in the River Thames through holes cut in the roadbeds. Okay, they didn't realize at that point how contaminating that would be. okay? And in America, during the 18th and 19th centuries, USA families eliminated together in bathrooms that were privies, outhouses in the backyard that accommodated, and you can see the different sides, mama, papa, and children. Okay. And so, and I think what's interesting is what we take for granted, this single bathroom that accommodates in one room, grooming, washing, and eliminating, is a blip. A recent blip in design history. It emerges when in the 19th century, based on the convergence of three forces, okay? Victorian Puritan morality that valued modesty between the sexes, and technology, the advent of the first public plumbing and sewage systems, and the advent of affordable mass-produced plumbing fixtures. Okay, so the point is, again, and we show this to clients who are a little wary, right? There's nothing new under the sun. We're just really returning. What we're arguing is that by looking back in history, allowed us to think out of the box and not anymore accept this norm of a men's room and a women's room. And so then we went back and we started looking, how are our colleagues addressing this issue? And we began to question this generally accepted solution for all gender restrooms, which is called the single-user restroom. And it supplements sex-segregated facilities by adding a single room, often with wheelchair access, with signage designating it as gender neutral or another sign. While the single user is a step in the right direction, the problem, again, it stigmatizes people, not only trans people, but people who are different, people with disabilities who say, you don't share with me, you go there, okay? Preventing that idea of mixing in public space. And so, as an alternative, we've developed a multi-user prototype. This is one example. We're building it now in many different universities across the country, but this one was built at our first partner, Gallaudet University, at a student center. Gallaudet is a school for the deaf in Washington, D.C. And working with local architect BKB and Marco, who's in the audience, we converted existing back-to-back sex-segregated restrooms on multiple floors of the center into what we call the multi-user prototype. What is it? It's just a single open space with floor-to-ceiling partitions in bathroom stalls and communal areas for washing and grooming. And why is it better? Because now non-binary or gender-fluid people are no longer have to choose between, do I go to a men's room or a women's room? I don't identify as either. Why should I have to make that choice? And also data shows that these spaces are safer, okay? Why? Because according to like Jane Jacobs, there's more eyes to monitor the transactions that go on, and also it cuts down on wait time for women, what's often referred to as potty parity. Also, our prototype features an entry lounges that activate corridors, while also providing a space for caregivers and people with disabilities to rest and to wait. Okay, so we also learned, that innovative design solutions aren't enough. Why? Because we learned that making the multi-user type that we advocated buildable was impossible. Why? Without amending the International Plumbing Code that prior to our lobbying mandated that there must be a women's and a men's room. And so we lobbied, we joined forces with the AIA and the National Center for Transgender Equality. We were successful, and I'm super proud of this, that in the 2021 version of the IPC now makes all gender multi-user restrooms code compliant. Okay? Now the problem is states and municipalities have to adopt this code, but it's happening. Okay, so I want to show you the latest version of our bathroom prototype. We call it Stall 2.0. It's a wellness hub, and it was commissioned for an exhibition that recently closed, Designing Peace, at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum here in New York. And we were invited by the curator to reimagine the Cooper Hewitt's existing ground floor restrooms pictured on the left, that to create a wellness hub, which addresses the self-care needs of the museum's diverse visitors. And it's divided, as you can see on the right, before and after, into overlapping zones. Welcome, wet and lounge. And our idea is that the bathroom is no longer a self-contained room, but an activator that can activate dynamic relationships with adjacent public spaces that surround it. So in this case with the Cooper Hewitt, there was a gallery, a lecture hall, a design studio, conservation labs, as well as a kind of big gallery that adjacent to the space. So let me walk you through it. At the Welcome Center, information about exhibition and events are displayed on a digital screen that plays a soothing audio. Why? Because we learned from our partners at Public Health that many people, particularly younger people, don't want to use public restrooms because they're embarrassed by the sounds of bodies doing what they do in restrooms. Okay. Visitors can refill water bottles. They can drink from a multi-height water fountain at a counter that also extends to create an information desk. And this is something that I care a lot about. Security guards, we've been studying. They are normally underpaid, often people of color, minorities, who are asked to sort of disappear, blend into your surroundings. We also learn from talking to guards, they want to engage, so now they can really be play an active role and interact with visitors when they enter. The wet zone also features mirrors and a multi-height sink, again for adults, children, and wheelchair users to groom and wash. They're touch-free faucets, which are hygienic and easier for people with disabilities to use. There are slots that allow views between mirrors to allow views into the adjacent lounge. And the facility, again, as in all our projects, recommends having full-height toilet stalls of standard ADA. But in addition, we advocate that all bathrooms should have at least one, if not two, what we call caregiving rooms. They include a sink, mirror, and toilet that offer a space for modest people like me, who don't want to share, or religious people, I mentioned before, like Muslim women or Orthodox Jews who are not allowed to sort of share facilities with men. We also include a lactation room outfitted with a comfortable chair, sink, and dry counter for everyone, cisgender men and women, no matter their identity, to baby change, feed their baby, breastfeed, or use a breast pump. And we recommend the inclusion of a prayer room, a meditative interfaith space that includes shoe racks and a foot shower for, again, Muslims to perform ablutions before prayer. And again, what we're trying to do is we've learned through our study with public health that people do everything that they have nowhere else to do in restrooms, okay? So we don't talk about that, but let's design for it. Okay. Also, visitors can take a break, recharge their minds and bodies, as well as their personal electronic devices at this lounge. Again, it features a multi-height seating with slots. This we learned by studying wheelchair users who say, why do I always have to look at people? Why can't I sit next to them? Damn it. All right, so now adults, children, and wheelchair users can engage together in side-by-side conversation. And we have autism specialists, Magda Mustafa, I'll talk about on our team. She recommends an escape space, a semi-enclosed room lined with soft, tactile acoustic wall panels and diffuse lighting. Why? It provides a non-reverberant, glare-free interior. For who? For everybody, but particularly to create a refuge for those on the autism spectrum, a population who are often prone to sensory overload in public spaces. Okay, and so since 2019, Mixed Design, I want to shift gears from bathrooms. So in 2019, how are we doing for time? Okay, so just not too much more. So now I'm fast forwarding. We're shifting from bathrooms to two other public spaces that museums and university campuses that we're working on. Why? Because again, I just want to bring this point back. Our work has been impacted. I think all of our work is impacted by current events. Okay, this time it was the pandemic and Black Lives Matter. These movements raised awareness, as you know, about social injustice in America. And it's motivated public institutions, some who became our clients, to demonstrate their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they called us up, and they said, help us out. Okay? So we have received commissions that have allowed us to think now at a larger scale, beyond restrooms, and to think about two types that we're focusing on right now at the office: museums and universities. But in the process of having these great new commissions, we've also been developing what I would call inclusive design tools that have become central to our approach that I want to share with you. The first is participatory design. The second is multisensory wayfinding. So let's talk about museums. In 2020, we received a rather sizable grant from federal and state agencies that allowed us to partner with the Queens Museum and the Brooklyn and the Whitney and a few other museums to pursue what we call the Mixed Museum Initiative. And we treated the Queens Museum as a case study that responds to a problem that we found that was common to museums that have undergone renovations in the early to mid-2000s. Okay, and this again would be the Brooklyn, the MoMA, the Whitney, many, many museums. So what we found that in an effort to appear more welcoming, these museums, like the Queens Museum pictured here, hired a well-known architect, a Starchitect, in this case Grimshaw Associates, a great British design firm, to replace the kind of existing opaque facade in the upper left. The building was originally built for the 1939 World's Fair, and to take that wall off, to put a glazed window wall, and through transparency lead to another new introduction you find, these giant atriums that double as event spaces. And what we learned in our research with Yale Public Health and others, that these spaces aren't meeting the needs of the many diverse visitors that don't come to museums, that museums now are working very hard to attract, and that would include Queens. So, collaborating with Queens, we wanted to address this challenge, and it provided us an opportunity to think about a practice that's become central to our work, participatory design. Mix offers an alternative to the top-down approach exemplified by the heroic modern architect, or today's Starchitect, or in this case, Howard Rourke in the movie. You should watch it, Ayn Rand's Fountainhead. Again, so who was this? Or this was a model that I was taught when I was your age, okay? A successful architect is a kind of white guy whose name is on the front door, a genius whose vision would only be contaminated or compromised by the input of everyday people like you, like clients or, God forbid, users. So instead, we follow the disability rights motto, nothing about us without us. Inclusive design depends on the active participation of users who provide valuable insights from their lived experience of the designed environment. And quite honestly, until I did this with my collaborators, I was skeptical, but now I'm a convert. So over the past 8 years, we've been collaborating with students and faculty from Yale Public Health to develop engagement tools, surveys, interviews, and workshops that we use in all of our projects, but at the Queens Museum. To do what? To conduct, as illustrated in this chart, what we call a comparative analysis of the intersecting and sometimes conflicting needs of people, in this case Q1 visitors. And again, we began to research them, categorized by age, gender, disability, and culture. But what we look at is how do these diverse communities perform the same activities in a space. So what we looked at, we thought we were going to start by looking at galleries. There's a lot of work done to make galleries more inclusive. What we learned, the problem often is the non-gallery public spaces. So we started studying, pictured here, entry, arriving at the front door from parking or public transportation. What are the barriers faced by people, too, getting oriented, too, at reception, okay? Or what about waiting in the atrium or participating in programs? And finally, wellness, taking care of bodily needs, not only in restrooms, but throughout the museum. So what we did 150 interviews and surveys. I'm super proud. I didn't do this work, my team did, okay? But we also paid what we call the access cohort, and I'm very proud of that. In other words, we recruited and we paid the access cohort. What do I mean by that? It was a group of about 30 members, some of them are illustrated here, who represented a cross-section of the museum diverse community. Queens, okay, many of you know, if it were a country, it would be like one of the most diverse countries on earth. And so we recruited native Spanish speakers, Chinese speakers, trans and non-binary folks, users of wheelchairs, scooters, and walkers, older adults, LGBT folk, and parents with young children. And we invited this group to participate in 3 activities. First, site assessments. We broke them down in smaller groups and we guided them through walkthroughs through the museums, public spaces, and taking notes to identify barriers, problems. What do these intersecting users face? Then we brought them back for co-design workshops, equipped with crayons, markers, cardboard, and clay. Participants made sketches and models to generate design proposals to alleviate or respond to the challenges they identified in the site assessment. And then third, we invited students like you. In this case, they were students that I teach in 2 seminars of mine at Yale, students from both Yale Public Health and architecture. They enrolled in 2 graduate seminars I taught, and they took all of this information, these incredible ideas from the Access cohort, and created scale drawings and renderings to visualize these ideas. And then for midterms and finals, we gathered again at the museum, gathered everyone together, and we did crits. And it was the Access cohort who said, I like that, that doesn't work, don't do this, do that. And in the end, they came up with some final ideas. And I just want to very briefly show a couple of examples of their recommendations, of how the students visualized the Access cohort's ideas. So for example, reception. Existing kind of sad desk that no one can find on the upper left. Okay, now reimagined based on these recommendations as a multi-purpose area that integrates visitor orientation and what's left out, seating. Okay, visitors now can obtain multilingual information at the reception desk. It features a multi-height overhanging counter whose dimensions are calibrated to provide legroom and a range of motion, a range of reach. Right, for people of different sizes, and people in wheelchairs, people in small stature. We displayed what we called an access shelf that displays accessibility equipment so that people with disabilities know that they could get wheelchairs, assistive listening devices, fidget toys, or noise-canceling headphones. And visitors can orient themselves using either, if you're sophisticated, a touch screen display, okay, or if you're old-fashioned like me, an old-fashioned large font print material. Also, the students identified another idea for improving the atrium. What we found over and over again is that there was a universal feeling that these contemporary white art museums with these big, large, uninterrupted surfaces are so light, bounces off of them, making it impossible to see for some populations. They're so loud and reverberant that people can't hear, okay? And also people found them sterile and antiseptic. And so based on these recommendations, the students came up with a modular system. It consists of modular seating, acoustic wall dividers, and these movable ramp platforms that could be easily reconfigured to subdivide this huge atrium into a series of what we call microclimates for special events, school groups, everyday ideas. And finally, another idea we never would have thought of is that the Access cohort said, enough of this white stuff, enough white space. We want spaces that we can enter that reflect us. And so this idea came to employ local artists to come up with fabrics and colors and patterns that reflect the diverse ethnic communities that live in Queens. And again, the outcome of the study is going to be published in a report that's going to be disseminated. We're going to present this at a symposium sponsored by the Architectural League of New York. It's on January 26th, and we hope some of you in the audience will come. Okay, so I just want to conclude the talk by showing you one last thing we're developing. We call it, multisensory wayfinding. And this is a set of interior design principles and also landscape principles that we're applying at, again, another genre of commissions that we're getting at the office I'm excited about. We're doing a lot of work at campuses. They include Portland Community College, Gallaudet University, Washington University, Carnegie Mellon, and the project I'm going to talk about is Princeton University. Okay? But it all began with COVID, okay? Which, unfortunately, I'm glad we're all here tonight, but it's not over, okay? And at that time, I brought my team, a team, I'll discuss it, to think about how can we learn from marginalized populations that we're studying. Since COVID, many of us have become hyper-aware, often anxious about how to move safely within once familiar but now disabling public spaces. And so, at Mixed Design, we believe that in order for people to feel safe but connected, they need public spaces designed to minimize what my colleagues call environmental stressors that are induced by disorientation, confusing spaces that lead to unintended contacts with other people or surfaces, okay? Or overstimulation. I've been talking about this theme, triggered by noise, light, and crowds that are particularly difficult for people on the autism spectrum. And we've learned that for different populations, reducing environmental stressors depends on, this is important, spatial awareness, sensory cues that make people aware of the presence and activities of others, especially in unfamiliar places. And so we're learning about sensory cues that combat environmental stressors by drawing from the expertise of three Mixed Design team members, who each of them have done independent research of three communities. There's Cumel Arroyo, who himself uses a wheelchair. He also happens to now be the disability, I'm getting his title wrong, for the MTA. He's in charge of making our transit system accessible. But he's been working with us for years. He's an expert on people who use walkers, wheelchairs, and scooters. Hansel Baumann, who authored Deaf Space Guidelines, an expert on what deaf and hard of hearing people need to navigate public space, and Magna Mustafa, an autism expert who authored the Aspects Index. And so what did we do? Together we conducted a comparative analysis of the overlapping needs of these three marginalized communities, and who all we realized have developed really interesting novel ways for fostering spatial awareness. And we thought, let's apply these lessons because we think they're relative for everyone in this room. So we're now applying multisensory wayfinding at this project in our office that Marco, again sitting in the office, is leading. We're just finishing construction documents. It's been going on for 3 years. It's called Hobson College. It's a ground-up mixed-use residential college at Princeton. And we're collaborating, again, with two firms. One is POW, a New York office. They are, again, we're all collaborating and working together, but POW is sort of focusing their efforts on the exterior facade and what we call the core and shell, the kind of MEP systems. There's another firm, Hanbury, that leads programming. They're the executive architect of record. And there's us. And what we're doing is we're leading the design of the building interiors, okay? And that includes a ground floor public spaces that consists of a commons, new classrooms, administrative offices, a new dining hall, a library, a performance space, and that's on the lower level in this diagram, and it's all connected by what's in white, a kind of arcade that connects different regions of the campus. On the upper levels, pictured here, there are 4 floors. I think we're accommodating 550 beds, 220 student rooms organized around community clusters, illustrated here, which are communal kitchens, lounges, and study spaces that create little communities on the upper 4 residential floors. And creating an inclusive community for living and learning and socializing is the value proposition that we were given for this building. Why? Because diversity, equity, and inclusion is particularly important. Why? Okay. The building's principal donor is a woman named Melody Hobson. She's a Black Princeton alum. She's a major entrepreneur the chairwoman of, you could Google her, but of many corporations, including Starbucks, and she will be the first black person at Princeton to have a building named after them. In addition, DEAI is a priority at Princeton as well as many other universities, I'm sure including this one, as well as where I teach at Yale. Okay, why many universities are making concerted efforts to overcome their legacy as elite white male institutions. And that is very important to Princeton. And one thing I'm adding that I think one of the things that we need to think about moving forward is what is the language of our buildings speak? And one of the things we're studying right now is this collegiate Gothic architecture that's associated with schools like Yale or Princeton. Great, but for many, it's exclusionary. Why? Because it's Christian iconography, makes people, some populations feel excluded. So I'm just going to show you, these are early sketches or studies that we made for One Space in Hobson College. It's the Commons. It's a study lounge. And I just want to show you how we were applying multisensory principles. Again, and these are early studies. Marco did a lot of these. Here's a section, and it shows our method. We subdivided this kind of lounge, okay, into 4 parallel activity zones, or we call them microclimates. Okay, and this idea of microclimates builds on an idea that we've been working on for a while. This is actually a project at Princeton that we built. It's called the Julian Street Library. We subdivided the library into parallel activity zones. There's a quiet blue zone, microclimate for absorbing information, and a contrast with the wood zone for processing information seated upright. So we took this idea of activity microclimates and wedded it to inclusive design. And so this lounge, again, is subdivided into these activity microclimates. In the middle is what we recommend, a barrier-free zone. It features, and this is important, color contrasting materials. In this case, we're going to use white terrazzo. It has a detectable edge for cane users and provides a wide differentiated circulation path for 2 people, either in wheelchairs or doing, let's say, ASL signage to pass. We have featured these study nooks. These are semicircular banquettes for small group conversations. They feature recommendations we learn from studying deaf people. For instance, high back seating, now upholstered in green fabric that complements skin tones. Why? Because we learned that many people, including blind and low vision people, deaf and hard of hearing people, want a visually calm background that allows you to have sight lines, to communicate, to sometimes read lips, or to see the silhouette of hands with ASL signing. And also, these are, again, lined in acoustic materials and soft adjustable lighting. Again, we learned about this from people on the spectrum who are overstimulated, but almost all of us need a break, or some of us a calmer background. We also borrowed an idea that we employed at this project that I did with the dean at the time, Karen Van Langen, at the UVA School of Architecture, this idea of suspended acoustic cones that absorb sound and double as light fixtures. They incorporate directional speakers so that people sitting under them or within the cone, can listen to shared content like music or podcasts without disturbing others. So we'll see if this gets included in the final project, but we propose that these acoustic cones could define, again, an acoustic microclimate, these glare-free spaces. And another thing I want to just emphasize is that one of the things that we're learning is that sustainability, wellness, human comfort, inclusive design, and building performance work hand in hand. So, for example, the kind of recommended overhang that creates this outdoor study arcade shades the double thermal glazing picked by our Bureau Happold, our engineers, but it also, again, is reducing glare, okay, and also creating a comfortable climate, again, for people, particularly people on the spectrum or people with disabilities who are very, very sensitive to the outside infiltration of light, glare, and sound. Okay, and finally, this is a section, it's a study for another university in California that we worked on. It's for a community kitchen. Another thing we're very interested in are these indoor-outdoor spaces. In this case, it's a communal kitchen where students can prepare meals at a shared kitchen. They can use ingredients grown in the nearby community garden. And again, some ideas, again, that came from Cumul Arroyo, that raised gardens with overhangs that can enable everyone to garden, including people in wheelchairs. So, I want to end my talk with a few concluding remarks. First, what I hope is the takeaway: we need to be design activists. We must engage in activism through the creation of spaces that promote social justice, human health and well-being in a way that meets the intersecting needs of all humans, but especially vulnerable populations that we as a discipline, as designers, have left out of the equation. We need to think about accountability, about reckoning. We believe, again, moving forward means looking back. If we want to imagine alternative futures that are better than what we have now, we believe that we need to contextualize them in a historical context. Why? To dismantle architecture's long-standing complicity in perpetuating problematic assumptions about human difference. And what this means, and if there's one thing I would hope you take away from my talk, never take anything you learn in school in face value, including what you think are the architectural standards that you read about in textbooks about guidelines, standards, codes. We realize that these codes, like the traditional codes of bathrooms, that there should be a men's room and a woman's room, is based upon often unstated ideas about human difference. Okay, and so I think that's really important, that we need to rethink standards so that we no longer, that we think outside of white, masculine, heterosexual, able-bodied norms. And another key point is what I would say is designing from the margins. The expanded role of the designer, okay? When I was in school, I was taught to believe that the success of an architect was measured by the number and size of the buildings, and not interiors, but the buildings, objects that he designed, okay? I left thinking that that's what I needed to do. And we've learned, I think at Mix, and a lesson I hope that I could share it with you, that we need to adopt a more expansive role of the designer, okay? That in particular, and I never would thought I'd be standing here saying this at my age to you, at the end of my career, or not the end of my career, but the maybe final chapter of my career, that to make a difference, you don't necessarily need to make buildings, okay? That it could be, that we could have more of an impact, or as much of an impact, by creating design tools, okay, and recommendations that could allow other people, right, to make design solutions that meet unique needs. And so what we're doing, we're spending a lot of time raising awareness. How? By disseminating our inclusive design principles on our website, by giving lectures like this, and writing publications, giving interviews. Also advocacy. Before, I never in my wildest dreams, if you had told me that back in 1996 we would have changed building codes, I'm the last person who would be interested in boring shit like building codes, okay? But they're super important, absolutely important. I'm so proud that my team was able to amend. We have to be advocates. We got to change policies, codes, okay? And lastly, guidelines. We are actually starting to write guidelines for universities, that have codes like FIT has. You have a project here, you hand to the architect. Well, this is the standard you must comply in. We're just finishing a 2-year project with MIT, and the outcome, again, is a 100-page book of design standards that will give guidelines and explain why it's important for every building that MIT will build on their campus, both retrofit and new construction in their future. Okay. So, and lastly, Designing from the Margins. Designing through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we believe, I hope you could be convinced, can be a catalyst for creativity. We draw inspiration from people with different physical, sensory, and social abilities. We draw inspiration from people who represent different racial, ethnic, and religious communities, okay? And what we find so interesting is these communities, again, come to their experience of public space using different faculties, different senses, vision, hearing, touch. Also, people with different racial and ethnicities come to public space and bring to it the different customs and practices that they bring. And that we think that bringing these perspectives of these people, normally consigned to the margins, can teach us valuable lessons that will allow us to work together to generate innovative ideas that will enhance everybody's experience of public space. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So many lessons for everybody,
Well, I hope so.
including faculty.
Okay, well, I don't mean to be too pedantic here, but...
No.
Yeah, and I also want to just say one other thing. I noticed that when I'm looking at that, all these amazing designers that I look up to, and I imagine these lectures filled with all these interiors that they built. And I thought, oh my God, I'm not doing any of that, right? And that was deliberate, okay? I mean, if you're interested, we have a website, and we've been doing it for 30 years, and we have lots of interiors, and we're very proud of them, okay? But I really wanted for this talk to be about maybe lessons learned that really I think are important to think about a contemporary issue.
I'm sure there are questions in the audience. This is just a stimulating topic, so many topics relevant to us at the moment as students here at FIT. And so we've provided some mics in the audience. If we could bring up the house lights. And if you'd like to ask a question of Joel, let's take this opportunity. Would anyone like to stand up with a question? There are extra points in my class for that. Yes, please.
Thank you, Joel, for that great essay. It's really great to realize that think about other needs that we normally don't think about. And I love the background design specific to such majors and forgot people that have always interested in that. I realize among the things that you're considering, did you consider right now there's a general increase somehow in cancer?
I think another thing I just would say that, you know, I think where we are right now is maybe similar to like ADA. People push back, right? And they said, we're not going to spend more money like on curb cuts or making, you know, rooms accessible. We take that for granted now, that's you know, equity, okay? And I predict, I'm confident, I'd like to be confident, that down the road, if we were met again, hopefully in 10 or 15 years, that we will understand as a society that we have to devote more space to making public spaces like bathrooms bigger and accommodate more needs, okay? But that's, I think, one of the, I'm glad you raised it because I think that's one of the challenges we have, okay? We're not just academics trying to sort of present pie-in-the-sky ideas, but we're working with clients to really implement them. Yeah?
So I have to applaud you. I think everything you're talking about is timely and poignant, and I am very impressed at the road that you're going down. One thing I wanted to know is, have you had any opportunity to make inroads into public spaces like parks, transit hubs, large spaces where you can provide, you know, diversity and equity for people en route to somewhere or enjoying the outdoors?
Yeah, well, first of all, landscape is huge, okay? And one of the things that I was kind of alluding to in my mean dig at this new Perlman Center is that access, exterior access is really, really important. So again, we've been able to do that, like for example at Hobson College. It's a quite enormous project in terms of acreage. And we're working with field operations and our collaborators in Princeton who are very committed to making the landscape accessible. And that includes one of the things that we introduced as a principle, which the university accepted. Again, that any entry or any circulation route, both inside and exterior, had to, again, not force people to separate. And to do it together as much as possible. And we have, we work very carefully with particular design interventions and slopes and curb cuts and things to make that happen. But to answer your question, no, we have not yet been able to work in public parks yet or transit hubs. I will point out that Camila Arroyo, who works with us for years, is the head of disability at the MTA. And we have we have a series of partners. I mentioned some of them. We meet every day, including this, not every day, every Wednesday morning. And one of the goals of Mix as it grows, and we hope it does, is to expand our horizons and to get involved in these important public spaces that you're talking about. And for example, Magna Mustafa, who I mentioned, who's actually based in Cairo, is here in Washington this week. We had her call with Hansel. Why? Because she's on a, I'm going to get this wrong, but on a committee that is going to sort of think about autism as a set of standards that's going to be incorporated, I believe, in what we call now LEED guidelines. Okay? So we are, I would say my team is beginning to, to think in these other scales. We hope to do so. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
Hi, Eric. I teach the interior design department here and design thinking in the business school. And one of the projects that we were working on in the design thinking class was accessible buses, and specifically for visually impaired with dogs. When I brought in a person from the MTA to sit on the jury, they said, we can't do any of that because it's not all-inclusive, it's only specific for one user group. So it was really interesting to see, say, your bathrooms that don't have an agenda, so to speak. So how do you respond when you're saying, oh, you want to get into, say, more public spaces, or trying to do specific things for people where it has to be all-inclusive? Are there barriers to that? Thank you.
Hi, so I'm not really sure. Hi, I'm not really sure if this is like a right place to ask, but I kind of wrote it down on my notes app. So you mentioned like the need to move beyond the legacy of non-inclusive design, but what do we do about the pre-existing examples of non-inclusive design? Like, is our role as designers to rewrite or cover up that history? Like, we can't just raise like non-inclusive design examples to the fore. And so, like, how do designers reconcile history and like our need to move towards a more progressive and inclusive future? Yeah, because like, you know, like there are like, I guess like even in our daily world, like there's more examples of non-inclusive design and the fact that we have like gendered bathrooms. So like, what do we do about them? Like, we can't just build on top of that. Like, is our role to alter that physically? Mhm. Well, sort of. But thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I am not a designer by any means, so my question is more, I guess, theoretical or theory-based. The example you raised about Israel and how like redesigning the bus stops for Orthodox communities, I thought that was interesting just because Israel, or maybe that particular community, was less diverse than, let's say, New York. So do you think that designing inclusive spaces will always leave someone behind, just because like a metro area like New York is like so diverse? Like you can find someone who always has, that needs a special accommodation. So would you, I guess it's a two-part question, would you say that someone will always get left behind? And if that's the case, does the language we use for the spaces take precedence over the design sometimes in those cases? Would the language take precedence over the design? So instead of calling it like a changing room or something like that, would we change the language so that people feel more inclusive and feel more inclined to use those spaces for their specific situations? Yeah, so do you feel like people always get left behind? And then the second question.
I mean, it's a really interesting question, but it gets back to this ongoing problem that or not challenge that I alluded to before. We, in actuality, clients generally don't have the square footage, the budget, the time, the schedule, right, to think about everybody's needs, to do participatory design and accommodate everyone. It's just simply impossible, and I think we have to accept that. The other thing that we're finding is that oftentimes there are conflicts. Like, for example, you've probably heard this, that the design of public benches, should it have handles or not, right? People, the elderly or people want handles, right? But some people say, that's just a device so that homeless people can sleep, right? Or they're, am I getting this right? Maybe Marco. Like, for example, there's often a conflict famously between people in blind and low vision people who appreciate bumpy surfaces to indicate transition zones. Q talks about it. It's very disturbing, a bumpy ride for people in wheelchairs. So there are always going to be, not only leaving people out, but conflicts. And one of the things that we find so interesting at Mix is trying to think about those conflicts. And then the most difficult, or one of the most difficult things that happen with clients, we say to them, here's that list. You can't design for everyone. So it's a difficult question. You need to prioritize, based on your own demographic and your own community, what you have the time and resources to build. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, asking that question, asking people like you, which marginalized person, right, should we have money for? That used to raise anyone's idea. Yeah, very difficult question, excuse me. But I think it's something we have to grapple with, because we don't have the time, space, resources to solve everyone's problem, okay? Hence, that's why we do not use the word universal design, because we don't think they're universal solutions. Again, I don't know if that answered your question, and there was something about language, and I'm not sure this is what you meant, but one of the things that we also are studying is signage. And so, for example, for bathrooms, if you go online, what do you call it? An all-gender restroom, or gender-neutral restroom, or this, that, and the other. We are totally not against. As much as possible, we say do not use words. And do not use words, and maybe that's what you're getting at, that single out certain people, right? Like, why is the most important thing about a restroom gender? Why do we think that's the most important category, to sort humans into two spaces, when there are many things that constitute who we are? So what we recommend as much as possible is to, and also because people speak different languages, is to use icons like symbols that let people know, like fixture icons, so that people could understand what activities that they can perform in a space like a bathroom, but not so much use language that sort of include certain people and exclude others. I hope that makes sense. Okay, anybody else? Okay. Is that someone? Yes. Oh, okay.
Actually, I wanted to know if there's any methods that you had to address the pushback for things like inclusive design from the public.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Are there any?
How would you address the public pushback for things like inclusive design with the transgender bathroom inclusivity?
Okay. I mean, I think I was alluding to, well, I'll give you an example. So, okay, what we try to do often is shift the conversation away from focusing on one single user. And when we kind of early in the process, we were conducting a workshop that was sponsored by the facilities, person around facilities at the University of Utah, located in Salt Lake City, which is, a city of Mormons, so many, many Mormons. And so we arrived, and it was a room like this with lots of end users, and the head of facilities was really agitated, and I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Joel, I'm not sure you understand this, but most of the people in this audience are Mormons, and they're not going to be sympathetic to the issue of like transgender people." And what we did, I said, "Don't worry about it." And what we do is we do a workshop. And what we do is we show people alternatives. But one of the things that we emphasize is it's not about one user, it's about many. And if you're lucky enough to live long enough, you too will have a disability. You too will need some of the accommodations that we're recommending. And oftentimes at the end, we have a survey and a vote, and we say, okay, well, what is the appropriate bathroom type for you here at, let's say in this case, University of Utah? And Mark, I don't think we've ever, and we've done many, many workshops, everybody, no matter their race, gender, religion, comes back and says that they, let's say in the case of restrooms, advocate for the multi-user. So I guess my answer to that question is, as opposed to sort of like advocate for one user group, our strategy will often be not only to talk about why that group is important, but to talk about how we're casting a wider net and making it good for everyone, including you, the doubting Thomas, and the audience.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
For those of you too bashful to ask a question in front of a mic, I'd like to welcome everybody to our reception, universally. Here, and this is the first time you've had a reception after a presentation. It's actually here on the ground floor behind the seats. So if you come down here and around, we have a selection of international cheeses, some beverages, and not a bartender. But hopefully you'll come and approach Joel, and thank you for everything tonight. Thank you for opening our eyes in many ways.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.